Welcome to Wild Cowboy Tales. In this land, a man minds his own business if he wants to live long. But sometimes, a man stumbles upon a secret so dark, so wrong, that minding his own business is the same as losing his soul. This is the story of a drifter who found hell in a barn, and the woman who taught him what it means to fight for something more than just the next sunrise. Bo Kerrigan wasn't running from the law. He was running from stillness. Stillness was where the memories lived, where the dust of the past settled in the quiet corners of a man's soul. So he kept moving. He drifted from ranch to ranch, a ghost in worn-out leather, his only constants the tired horse under him and the vast, indifferent sky above. His journey brought him to the edge of the Cimarron territory, a sun-scalded stretch of land where the law was a rumor and a man's life was worth the speed of his draw. He was looking for a few weeks of work, enough to rest his horse and fill his pockets with enough coin to keep moving. He found the Wade spread. It wasn't hard to find. The Double W Ranch was less a ranch and more a kingdom. It sprawled across a dozen square miles of the best grazing land, controlling the only reliable river for a day's ride in any direction. The main house was a two-story monstrosity of cut timber, a monument to a wealth that seemed out of place in the rugged landscape. The fences were perfect, the barns were freshly painted, and the men who worked there moved with a quiet, fearful efficiency. Bo rode up to the main house, his Cimarron-style hat pulled low, his face a mask of trail dust and studied indifference. A man with a shotgun and a mean-looking scowl met him on the porch. "State your business," the man grunted. "Heard you might be looking for hands," Bo said, his voice a low, gravelly sound that didn't invite conversation. The guard looked him up and down, taking in his lean, hard frame, the worn Colt holstered on his hip, and the quiet competence in his eyes. "Wait here." A few minutes later, the man himself appeared. Jedediah Wade was a man who smiled too much. It was a wide, white smile that never reached his eyes. He was handsome, dressed in a clean linen shirt and tailored trousers, looking more like St. Louis banker than a rancher. But there was a coldness about him, a reptilian stillness that made the hair on Bo's arms stand up. "Looking for work, are you?" Jedediah asked, his voice as smooth as old leather. "Yes, sir," Bo said, keeping his own voice flat. "Can you ride? Can you rope? Can you follow an order without asking questions?" "Yes, sir." Jedediah's smile widened. "I like a man of few words." He looked Bo over again, a predator assessing a new hound. "All right. You're hired. Bunkhouse is out back. Foreman's name is Riggs. You'll answer to him. You'll work hard, keep your head down, and stay out of business that isn't yours. Do that, and we'll get along just fine." He paused, his smile becoming a thin, sharp line. "Fail to do that, and you won't." The threat was as clear as the sky above. Bo just nodded and rode towards the bunkhouse. The atmosphere on the Wade Ranch was one of quiet, suffocating oppression. The other hands were a sullen, tight-lipped bunch. They did their work, ate their meals in silence, and drank their whiskey with a grim determination. They never spoke of the Wades. They never joked. They moved as if a storm was perpetually about to break. Bo kept to himself, just as he was told. He was a good worker, his movements economical and sure. He repaired fences, wrangled cattle, and did what was asked of him, his silence a shield. He had been on ranches like this before, places run by iron-fisted men. His plan was simple: earn his pay and disappear. But the devil, as they say, is in the details. And Bo Kerrigan was a man who noticed details. He noticed the way the foreman, Riggs, a man with a brutal, scarred face, would sometimes ride out with two other men and return a day later, their horses lathered, with no explanation. He noticed the way the local sheriff would visit the ranch, not to enforce the law, but to sit on the porch with Jedediah, drinking his whiskey and laughing a little too loudly. And he noticed the barn. It was an old, dilapidated structure, set apart from the newer, well-kept buildings. It was used for storage, filled with old tack and broken equipment. But it was always kept padlocked. And the men, he noticed, gave it a wide berth. They would walk the long way around it, their eyes averted, as if the very ground it stood on was cursed. One evening, about a week into his employment, Bo was returning from the far pastures as twilight fell. He was taking a shortcut that led him past the back of the old barn. As he passed, he heard a sound. It was a soft sound, almost lost in the whisper of the wind. A faint, metallic clinking followed by a low, mournful sound that was not quite a word, not quite a cry. It was the sound of pure, abject misery. Bo stopped, his hand resting on the neck of his horse. He listened. The sound came again, a choked-off whimper of pain. It was a human sound. A woman's sound. Jedediah Wade was not married. There were no women on the ranch, save for the old Mexican cook who lived in a small shack by the main house. Against every instinct for self-preservation he had, Bo dismounted. He tied his horse to a scrub cedar and crept towards the back of the barn. The wood of the barn was old and weathered, with wide gaps between the planks. He found a crack at eye level and peered inside. The interior was dark and filled with shadows, but the last of the evening light filtering through the gaps gave him enough to see. The barn was mostly empty, just piles of old hay and broken wagon wheels. But in the far corner, something was huddled in the shadows. It was a woman. She was kneeling on the dirt floor, her back to him. She was thin, almost skeletal, dressed in a ragged, filthy shift. Her long, dark hair was a matted, tangled mess, and around her ankle was a heavy iron chain, the other end bolted to a thick ring set in the stone foundation. The clinking he had heard was the chain shifting as she moved. As he watched, horrified, she let out another soft, pain sound. He could see now that her back was a crisscrossing roadmap of old scars, white and puckered against her pale skin. Some were old, some were new. Bo felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. He had seen a lot of things in his life. He had seen men shot, hanged, and left for the buzzards. But this was different. This was a secret, hidden evil, a prolonged and personal cruelty that turned his blood to ice. He had been told to mind his own business, to keep his head down, to not ask questions. To do so meant his pay, his safety, his ability to just keep moving. But as he looked at the chained, broken figure in the barn, Bo Carrigan knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that he could not unsee what he had just seen. He had stumbled upon the Devil's Acre, and now he had to make a choice, walk away and save himself, or step into the heart of hell and try to save a ghost. Bo didn't move for a long time. He just stood there, pressed against the rough wood of the barn, the scene inside burning itself into his mind. The rational part of him, the part that had survived for 30 years in a hard country, was screaming at him to turn around, get on his horse, and ride until the Wade Ranch was nothing but a bad memory. He had come here for a wage, not a war. This was not his fight. But then the woman shifted, and he heard the soft, defeated clink of the chain, and he knew he wasn't going anywhere. There were lines a man didn't cross, and then there were lines that, once seen, the man had to cross back over, no matter the cost. He spent a sleepless night in the bunkhouse, the image of the chained woman replaying in his mind. The other hands snored and mumbled in their sleep, oblivious. Bo lay awake, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt, a cold, hard plan forming in his mind. He was a man who preferred to be invisible, but he was also a man who knew how to act. He would not be impulsive. He would be patient. He would be smart. The next day, he went about his work with a new, secret purpose. He watched everything. He noted the routines of the ranch, the comings and goings of Jedediah and his foreman, Riggs. He saw that they fed the woman once a day, in the evening. Riggs would unlock the barn, shove a bowl of slop and a bucket of water inside, and lock it again, never saying a word. Bo knew he had to talk to her. He had to understand. His chance came that evening. He volunteered for the last watch over a herd of new calves, a job that would keep him out late and allow him to move about the ranch unnoticed after the other hands had turned in. The moon was a thin, silver sliver, providing just enough light to see, but not enough to be seen. After midnight, when the main house was dark and the bunkhouse was quiet, he made his move. He slipped out of the camp and crept to the barn, moving with a hunter's silence. He didn't have a key to the padlock, but years of living on the trail had taught him other skills. With a thin piece of wire from a broken fence, he worked the lock. It was old and simple. After a few tense minutes, it clicked open. He swung the heavy door open, its groan unnaturally loud in the silence. He stepped inside, his pistol in his hand. The air in the barn was thick with the smell of hay, dust, and despair. In the far corner, the woman scrambled back, pressing herself against the stone wall, the chain rattling with her terror. Her eyes were huge and dark in the dim light, like a cornered animal's. "I'm not going to hurt you," Bo said, his voice a low, soft rumble, trying to keep it calm. She said nothing, just watched him, her breath coming in shallow, terrified gasps. He took a step closer. "My name is Bo Kerrigan." He crouched down, to make himself seem less threatening. "I saw you yesterday." Her eyes were fixed on the gun in his hand. He realized his mistake and slowly, deliberately, holstered the Colt. "I'm not one of them," he said. He had brought something with him. He took a clean canteen of water and a piece of bread and cheese wrapped in a cloth from his coat pocket. He placed them on the ground, a few feet from her. "Here." She stared at the food, then back at him, her expression a mixture of desperate hunger and profound suspicion. "Who are you?" she finally whispered, her voice a dry and used rasp. "Just a man passing through," he said. "What's your name?" She hesitated for a long time. "Eleanor," she said, the name a ghost on her lips. "Eleanor," he repeated. The name was beautiful, a stark contrast to the ugliness of her situation. "Why are you here, Eleanor? Why is he doing this to you?" A look of utter, hopeless despair washed over her face. "Please," she whispered, and her voice was filled with a desperate, urgent plea. "You have to go. You cannot be here. If he finds you." "Who is he?" Bo asked, though he already knew the answer. "Jedediah," she breathed. "My brother." "Stepbrother." The word hit Bo like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a random act of cruelty against a stranger. This was family. "Why?" he asked again. "Because he can," she said, a universe of pain in those three simple words. "Because my father is dead. Because this ranch was supposed to be mine too. Because I am his property now." She looked at him, and for the first time, a spark of something other than fear appeared in her eyes. It was a warning. "You should not have come in here. You should not have seen me." "I couldn't just walk away," he said. "You must," she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "You don't understand. Men have tried to help before. A ranch hand who gave me water. A traveling doctor who asked him many questions. They disappear. Jedediah makes them disappear. No one ever finds them." The threat was real, and it settled in the small, dark space between them. Eleanor was not just warning him for his own sake. She was trying to protect him. The girl in chains was trying to protect him. The thought was both humbling and infuriating. "I can get you out of here," Bo said, his voice a low, determined growl. "Tonight. We can ride out and never look back." She let out a short, bitter sound that was not quite a laugh. "And go where? He owns everything. The law, the land. He would hunt us down. And when he found us," she didn't need to finish the sentence. The look in her eyes was enough. "Your helping me will not save me. It will only get you killed." She looked at the chain on her ankle. "This is my life now. Please, for your own sake, go. And pretend you never saw me." It was a plea for his life, an acceptance of her own damnation. And it was the single most courageous thing Bo had ever witnessed. He stood there, torn. She was right. The smart thing to do, the rational thing, was to listen to her, to walk away, to save himself. He had no stake in this fight. He was a drifter. He could be 100 miles away by sunrise. He looked at her, at the raw sores on her wrists where she had struggled against her bonds, at the old, faded bruises on her arms, at the profound, soul-deep weariness in her eyes. And he thought of the casual, smiling cruelty of Jedediah Wade. He thought of the men who had disappeared, and he knew he couldn't be another man who walked away. To do so would be to leave a piece of his own soul behind in this dark, filthy barn. He made his decision. It was not a rational decision. It was a choice born of a deep, almost forgotten well of decency within him. "I'm not leaving you here," he said, and his voice held a quiet, absolute finality. He reached for the heavy iron shackle on her ankle. "No," she whispered, a new terror in her eyes of him. "But for him. Don't touch it." But Bo ignored her. He examined the lock. It was heavy, but not complex. He knew he could break it. "I'm not leaving," he repeated, looking her straight in the eye. "We're going to get you out of here. But we're not just going to run. We're going to do this my way. Quietly. Smartly." He gave her a grim, determined look. "And when we're done, Jedediah Wade will wish he had never laid a hand on you. In that moment, a pact was made. A pact between a broken woman who had given up hope and a rootless drifter who had just found a reason to stand still. It was a pact that would be sealed in secrecy, and likely, in blood. The quiet cowboy had just declared a silent war on the king of the Cimarron. Bo knew that a hasty and planned escape was doomed to fail. Jedediah had eyes everywhere, and to riders fleeing in the night would be an easy trail to follow. Before they could run, they needed a plan. And before they could plan, Eleanor needed to have her strength. He did not break her chains that night. Instead, he began a quiet, dangerous campaign of kindness. He became a ghost of a different sort, a phantom of mercy in the heart of the Wade's cruel kingdom. His first act was to make a copy of the barn key. The lock was old, and he was able to make a quick impression of it in a piece of soap. The next day, he used the forge, ostensibly to repair a broken branding iron, to hammer out a crude but functional duplicate. Now, he could come and go without leaving a trace. Every night, after the ranch was asleep, he would visit her. He brought her real food from the cookhouse stew, bread, dried fruit, a feast compared to the slop Riggs provided. He brought her clean water. He brought a wet cloth so she could wash the grime from her face and hands. But his most important gift was medicine. He saw the angry, infected sores on her wrists and ankles from the constant chafing of the irons. On a trip to town for supplies, he visited the town doctor, a nervous, perpetually sweating man who was clearly terrified of the Wades. Bo didn't mention Eleanor. He said he had a horse with a bad case of rope gall. He described the wounds, and the doctor, eager to be helpful without getting involved, gave him a jar of strong, dark salve. That night, in the dim light of the barn, he gently applied the cool, soothing ointment to Eleanor's raw skin. She flinched at his touch, a lifetime of abuse making her recoil from any human contact. "Easy now," he said, his voice a low murmur. His hands, though calloused and rough from a life of hard work, were surprisingly gentle. "This will help." She endured his touch, her body rigid, her eyes closed. But as the salve began to ease the burning pain, some of the tension left her. It was a simple act, a moment of care in a life that had known none. And it was more powerful than any key. In these nightly visits, they began to talk. She told him her story, filling in the gaps. Her father, a kind but weak man, had married Jedediah's mother, a hard, ambitious woman. When her father died, the ranch, which was legally half hers, had fallen under the complete control of her stepmother and, eventually, Jedediah. She was not family. She was an inconvenient, leftover piece of a previous life, a living reminder that Jedediah was not the sole, true heir. He kept her chained not just out of cruelty, but as a constant, brutal assertion of his ownership over the land and everything on it. In turn, Bo told her about himself. Not about his past as a bounty hunter, not about Ghost Hand. He told her of the small things, of growing up on a farm in Ohio, of his dream to one day have a small piece of land of his own. He spoke of the trail, of the loneliness, of the way a man could lose himself if he didn't have something to anchor him. He found himself talking more to this chained girl in a dusty barn than he had to anyone in the past 5 years. A fragile, dangerous trust was being built between them, a small, secret garden in the midst of Jedediah's hell. Eleanor's spirit, which had been buried under years of abuse, began to show signs of life. The dull, hopeless look in her eyes was occasionally replaced by a flicker of the intelligent, resilient woman she was meant to be. She began to ask questions, to think, to plan with him. The danger, however, was ever present. One night, Bo was in the barn with Eleanor, changing the dressings on her healing wrists, when they heard it. The sound of hoofbeats, approaching the barn. "It's Riggs," Eleanor whispered, her face pale with terror. "He does a late-night check sometimes." There was no time to escape. Bo looked around frantically. There was nowhere to hide. He did the only thing he could. He doused his lantern and pressed himself into the deepest shadows of an empty horse stall, his hand on his gun. The heavy padlock rattled, and the door creaked open. The massive silhouette of Riggs, the foreman, filled the doorway. He held a lantern high. Its light cast long, dancing shadows, painting the barn in a terrifying orange and black. Bo held his breath. He was hidden, but if Riggs decided to do a thorough search, he would be found. And if he was found, he would have to kill the foreman. And that would be the end of their quiet rebellion. Riggs grunted, his eyes scanning the barn. He seemed to be looking for nothing in particular, just performing his routine. His gaze fell on Eleanor. She was huddled in her usual corner, trying to look as broken and pathetic as she always did. But Riggs noticed something. "What's that?" he growled, taking a step closer. His lantern light fell on the bowl from which Eleanor had just eaten. It was one of the good tin bowls from the cookhouse, not the chipped wooden one he usually gave her. Eleanor's heart stopped. Riggs stared at the bowl for a long, agonizing moment. He looked at Eleanor. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. He looked around the barn, his gaze sweeping over the shadows, passing just feet from where Bo was hiding, his knuckles white on the grip of his Colt. "Someone's been feeding you," Riggs said, his voice a low, menacing growl. He took another step toward Eleanor. "Who is it?" Eleanor didn't answer. She just stared at the ground, her body trembling. From his hiding place, Bo prepared to move. He would have one shot. It had to be clean. But Riggs stopped. He looked again at Eleanor's huddled, pathetic form. And he seemed to come to a different conclusion. It couldn't be one of the hands. They were all too terrified. It must have been the old cook, Maria, a soft-hearted old woman. Riggs let out a snort of contempt. "That old woman's got a death wish," he muttered to himself. He turned and kicked the tin bowl, sending it clattering across the barn. "Don't get used to it." He spat on the ground, then turned and left, slamming the heavy door and locking it behind him. Bo waited until the sound of Riggs's footsteps faded away. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He stepped out of the shadows, his body slick with a cold sweat. It had been too close. Their luck wouldn't hold forever. He looked at Eleanor. She was shaking, the terror of the near discovery still fresh. But as she looked up at him, there was a new resolve in her eyes. "You were right," she whispered. "We can't wait. We have to get out of here. Now." The close call had been the catalyst. The time for quiet kindness and secret planning was over. The time for action had come. Bo nodded, his own face a grim mask of determination. Their two-person rebellion was about to become an open escape. And the real war was about to begin. The decision was made. They would leave. Not in a week, not tomorrow, but tonight. Riggs's close call had stripped away their last illusions of safety. Every extra moment they spent on the Wade Ranch was another roll of the dice. Their planning, which had been theoretical, now became a thing of desperate, urgent reality. They had a few precious hours before dawn. "We need a diversion," Bo said, his voice a low, urgent whisper in the darkness of the barn. "Something big enough to draw every man on this ranch out of his bed. Something that will keep them busy for at least an hour." Eleanor, her mind now sharp and focused, had an idea. "The hay barn," she said. "The new one, by the river. It's full from the last cutting. If it were to catch fire." It was a perfect, terrible idea. The hay barn was Jedediah's pride and joy, the symbol of his ranch's prosperity. A fire there would be a 4-alarm emergency. It would bring every hand, including Jedediah and Riggs, running. "A fire it is," Bo agreed. "But we need to make it look like an accident. A lightning strike, maybe. But there's no storm tonight." He thought for a moment. A lantern. Left too close to the hay. It happens. Their plan had two parts, a dangerous, synchronized ballet to be performed in the dark. Bo would be responsible for the diversion. He would sneak to the hay barn, set up the accident, and then get to the main corral to get them horses. Eleanor's job was just as crucial, and just as dangerous. While they are all at the fire, Bo instructed, "You need to get to the main house." To Jedediah's study. "Why?" she asked, confused. "Because we're not just running," he said, his eyes hard. "We're taking something with us. Leverage. Something to keep him from hunting us to the ends of the earth. You know this house better than anyone. Is there a safe? A place he keeps his important papers?" Eleanor's eyes widened as she understood. She thought for a moment, her mind going back to the hundreds of hours she had spent as a child, a silent ghost in her own home. "Yes," she breathed, "behind a painting in his study. My father's old safe. Jedediah never changed it." "What's in it?" "I don't know for sure," she admitted. "But my father kept everything there. The original deed to this land. Account books. Everything." "That's our target," Bo said. "It's a long shot, But if that deed proves you have a claim to this ranch, it's a weapon he can't ignore. It was an incredibly risky addition to their plan, but it was also a brilliant one. To run was to be a fugitive, but to run with proof of a legal claim was to become a plaintiff, a threat of a different, more powerful kind. "I'll need to get out of these," she said, looking down at the heavy iron shackles. Bo pulled a heavy file from his pocket. "I'll take care of that right now." Filing through the thick iron bolt of her shackle was grueling, noisy work. Every rasp of the file sounded like a scream in the quiet barn. Bo worked quickly, pausing every few seconds to listen. Finally, with a sharp crack, the bolt gave way. Eleanor was free of her chains for the first time in years. She rubbed her scarred ankle, a look of dazed disbelief on her face. There was no time to savor it. "All right," Bo said, his voice low and commanding. "It's time. I'll go for the hay barn. Give me 30 minutes. You'll see the flames. When you do, you go for the house. Don't take anything but the papers. Meet me at the corral. If I'm not there, you take the fastest horse you can find and you ride north. Don't stop. Don't look back. Understand?" She nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a fierce, newfound resolve. He looked at her, at the thin, determined woman standing before him. He felt a sudden, powerful urge to protect her, to tell her to stay put while he did everything. But he knew that was not what she needed. She needed to be a part of her own rescue. "Be safe, Eleanor," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "You too, Bo," she replied. He slipped out of the barn and disappeared into the night. Eleanor was alone, her heart hammering. She waited, counting the seconds, which stretched into an eternity. She crept to a crack in the barn wall and peered out. The ranch was dark and silent. Then, in the distance, a faint orange glow appeared. It grew brighter and brighter, until the northern sky was lit up by a malevolent, flickering light. The fire. A moment later, a shout went up from the bunkhouse. Then another. Lights began to flare on in the main house. Men poured out of the bunkhouse, half-dressed, yelling in confusion. She saw Jedediah and Riggs emerge from the main house, their faces illuminated by the distant flames, their voices sharp with angry commands. The entire ranch was galvanized into action, a chaotic swarm of men and horses, all of them heading for the fire. The diversion had worked perfectly. This was her chance. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Eleanor slipped out of the barn. She kept to the shadows, her bare feet making no sound on the soft earth. The main house, which had been the center of the ranch's power, was now dark and empty. It was her family home, a place of ghosts and painful memories. But tonight, it was her target. She reached the back door, the same one her mother used to use, and found it unlocked in the haste of the fire alarm. She slipped inside. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the frantic beating of her own heart and the distant, faint shouts from the fire. She moved through the familiar rooms, a ghost in her own past. She reached Jedediah's study. The room was just as she remembered it, dominated by her father's massive oak desk. On the wall hung a large, somber painting of her stepmother. That was the one. She took the painting down. Behind it was the black iron door of the safe. She took a deep breath and began to turn the dial, her fingers praying that the combination was the one she remembered from her childhood, her father's birthday. Click, clack, click. She pulled the handle. The heavy door swung open. Inside, there were stacks of money, bags of coin. She ignored them. She was looking for something else. And there it was, at the very back. A slim, leather-bound portfolio. She opened it. Inside was the original land grant, signed by the governor, in her father's name. And under it, a series of ledgers, detailing every transaction, every debt, every dirty secret of the Wade Empire. She had it. She had the weapon. She tucked the portfolio under her arm and turned to leave. And her heart stopped. Standing in the doorway of the study was a man. It wasn't Jedediah. It was one of the ranch hands, a young, sullen man she had seen around the corral. He must have been left behind to guard the house. He stared at her, then at the open safe, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and greed. He smiled, a slow, ugly smile. Well, well, he said. Look what we have here. The little ghost is a little thief." He took a step into the room, blocking her exit. "The boss will pay a pretty penny for this. And for you." Eleanor was trapped. All their planning, all their risk, was about to end in this room. But as the man advanced on her, something inside her, something that had been dormant for years, finally snapped. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But for the first time in her life, it was eclipsed by a pure, white-hot rage. She was done being a victim. The ranch hand, whose name was Cale, advanced on Eleanor with the confident swagger of a man who held all the cards. He saw a small, frightened woman, an easy prize. He did not see the furnace of rage that was burning behind her wide, dark eyes. "Give me the book, little ghost," he sneered, reaching for the leather portfolio. Eleanor reacted on pure, primal instinct. She did not scream. She did not cower. She swung the heavy, leather-bound portfolio with all her might, catching Cale square in the side of the head. The blow was solid, the corner of the book connecting with a sickening thud. Cale grunted in surprise and pain, stumbling back, one hand flying to his head. He had not expected resistance. In that moment of shocked hesitation, Eleanor ran. She didn't run for the door he was blocking. She ran for the large window behind the desk. Without a second's thought, she used a heavy inkstand to shatter the glass and scrambled through the jagged opening, not caring about the cuts she received on her arms and legs. She landed in the bushes outside and ran, her bare feet flying over the dark, familiar ground. She could hear Cale behind her, yelling in rage and surprise. A gunshot cracked the night air, the bullet whining past her head. She didn't look back. She just ran, her lungs burning, the precious portfolio clutched to her chest. She ran for the corral, the designated meeting place. As she got closer, she saw a dark figure working frantically with the horses. "Bo! Bo!" she cried out. He spun around, his pistol in his hand. Relief washed over his face when he saw it was her. "Get on!" he yelled, throwing her up onto the back of a powerful black stallion he had just saddled. He swung up behind her, taking the reins. Another shot rang out from the house. Cale was on the porch now, firing at them. Bo didn't waste time firing back. He dug his heels into the stallion's sides, and the horse leaped forward, launching them into a full gallop. They rode hard, leaving the house, the fire, and the shouting men behind them. They were free, but their freedom was a fragile, fleeting thing. They knew that as soon as the fire was out, Jedediah would discover the break-in, the empty safe, and the missing woman. And he would come for them. The escape was over. The hunt had begun. They rode through the night, pushing the horse as hard as they dared. Bo did not follow the main trails. He led them into the rugged, broken country of the Badlands, a labyrinth of canyons and mesas that he knew would be difficult to track. As dawn broke, they found a small, hidden spring and allowed their horse to drink, while they took stock of their situation. Eleanor's arms and legs were bleeding from the broken glass, and she was shivering with exhaustion and reaction. Bo, with a gentle touch that was becoming familiar, cleaned her cuts and wrapped them with strips of cloth torn from his own shirt. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with a quiet awe as he looked at the portfolio she still clutched. "You got it." "I had to," she said, her voice trembling. She told him about Cale, about her desperate flight from the house. A grim look settled on Bo's face. "He'll have told Jedediah which way we were heading. They'll be on our trail by now." They were fugitives, with a posse led by a ruthless and enraged man hunting them. For the next 3 days, they lived a desperate, hunted existence. Bo's skills as a man of the wilderness were all that kept them alive. He was a master of evasion, of covering their tracks, of finding the hidden paths that would confuse their pursuers. He would have them ride up rocky creek beds where they would leave no prints, or cross windswept ridges where the dust would obscure their trail. Eleanor, who had spent her life as a prisoner, discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. The wild, untamed land did not frighten her. She felt a strange kinship with it. She had a keen eye for finding edible plants and an unerring sense of direction. She was not a liability, she was a partner. The shared hardship and constant danger forged a bond between them that was stronger than steel. They moved as one, their survival utterly dependent on each other's skills and trust. At night, they would huddle together for warmth by a small, smokeless fire, the vast, star-filled sky their only roof. In those quiet moments, they would talk, their shared pasts and uncertain future the only topics in their small, desperate world. But Jedediah was a relentless hunter. He knew this land as well as they did, and he was driven by a cold, obsessive fury. On the fourth day, from a high mesa, Bo saw them through his spyglass. A dozen riders, moving fast, closing the distance. "They're gaining on us," he said, his voice grim. "Their horses are fresher." They were running out of time, and out of land. The Badlands were giving way to a more open, flatter country where there would be nowhere left to hide. "We can't outrun them," Eleanor said, her voice steady, her fear replaced by a hard resolve. "No," Bo agreed. "So we have to stop running and start fighting." He looked around at the landscape. They were in a narrow canyon with steep, rocky walls. It was a good place to make a stand. A good place to die. "There's a place a mile from here," Eleanor said, her voice quiet. She pointed to a series of jagged rock formations to the north. "The old mission. It's been abandoned for 50 years. But the walls are thick adobe. There's a well." It was a fortress. A defensible position. A place to turn the tables, to make the hunters become the hunted. "All right," Bo said, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "We'll make our stand there. But we're not just going to wait for them. We're going to give them a welcome." They rode for the old mission, a desperate, final gamble. They were no longer just running for their lives. They were riding to war. And in the heart of the desolate wilderness, the two fugitives prepared to make their final, bloody stand against the army that was hunting them down. The San Esteban mission was a ghost of a place, its adobe walls crumbling under the relentless assault of 100 years of sun and wind. The roof of the main chapel had long since collapsed, leaving the nave open to the sky, but the outer walls and the small, cloistered monk cells were still largely intact. It stood on a low rise, commanding a clear view of the surrounding plains, a lonely, defiant sentinel in the vast emptiness. It was, as Eleanor had said, a fortress. They arrived with only an hour to spare before Jedediah's posse would be upon them. There was no time for rest. The final, desperate phase of their plan began immediately. "They'll expect us to be holed up in the main building, waiting to be besieged," Bo said, his mind working with a cold, tactical clarity. "We're not going to do what they expect." Their strategy was one of misdirection and ambush. They would use the mission's confusing layout of collapsed walls, hidden courtyards, and dark, empty cells to their advantage. First, they needed to secure their position. They led their horse into one of the most intact of the monks' cells, which had a small, ring-fed well in the Carnera source of water that would be crucial in the coming fight. Next, they prepared the battlefield. Bo, with his knowledge of defensive tactics, and Eleanor, with her intimate memory of the mission's layout from childhood explorations, worked as a seamless team. They created a false trail, leading directly to the main, roofless chapel, making it look as though they had taken refuge there. Inside the chapel, behind the collapsed altar, they set up a decoy, a bundle of their spare clothes propped up to look like a person huddled in cover. Their real position was in a small bell tower at the corner of the mission, a high, defensible perch that offered a perfect crossfire into the main chapel. It had narrow, slit-like windows, perfect for shooting from, and only one narrow, easily defended stone staircase. As they worked, a profound change was taking place in Eleanor. The fear that had been her lifelong companion was being burned away by the heat of necessity. She was no longer a victim. She was a soldier, preparing for battle. She moved with a purpose and a clear-headedness that impressed even Bo. "My father brought me here once," she said, as they hauled a heavy, fallen beam to barricade the base of the bell tower stairs. "He told me that these walls were built to protect the body, so the soul could be at peace." She gave a grim, humorless smile. "Today, they will just protect the body." They finished their preparations just as the first riders of the posse appeared on the horizon. Bo and Eleanor scrambled up the narrow staircase to their perch in the bell tower. They had one rifle, one pistol, and the portfolio of papers that was the entire reason for this fight. "Stay down until I tell you," Bo said, his voice a low command. He checked the load in his Winchester. "And don't shoot unless you have a clear shot. We can't afford to waste a single bullet." Eleanor nodded, her own face set in a mask of grim determination. She held the heavy portfolio to her chest. This was her shield, her weapon, her justification for everything. Jedediah and his 11 men rode up to the mission with a confident, arrogant swagger. They saw the tracks leading into the main chapel. They saw no sign of defense. They thought they had their prey cornered and exhausted. There in the church, Jedediah yelled, a triumphant sneer on his face. Flesh them out. I want the girl alive. The man. You can kill him. Half a dozen of his men dismounted and, using the outer walls for cover, began to advance on the main chapel. The other half, including Jedediah and Riggs, remained on their horses, forming a perimeter. From the bell tower, Bo watched them advance. He waited. He let them get all the way into the open courtyard in front of the chapel. He let them feel safe. Now, he whispered. He rose from the slit window and fired. The Winchester's roar was deafening in the still air. One of the advancing men cried out and fell, clutching his leg. At the same instant, from a different window in the tower, a second shot rang out. Bo had reloaded and moved, a classic guerrilla tactic to make one rifleman sound like two. The second shot took another man in the shoulder, sending him scrambling for cover. The posse was thrown into confusion. The shots had come from a direction they hadn't expected. They were exposed, trapped in the open courtyard. They began firing wildly at the bell tower, their bullets chipping away at the thick adobe walls, but finding no target. There in the tower, Riggs roared, "Get in the chapel! Use it for cover!" The remaining 4 men on foot did as he said, scrambling into the roofless chapel, diving behind the crumbling walls. This was exactly what Bo had wanted. He had split their force and lured them into his designated kill box. "They're trapped," Bo said to Eleanor. "Now, we just wear them down." For the next hour, a tense, deadly siege unfolded. Bo, moving from window to window, kept the men in the chapel pinned down, his shots infrequent but nervingly accurate. He wasn't trying to kill them, just to keep them from mounting any kind of organized attack. Outside, Jedediah was in a fury. His simple mop-up operation had turned into a protracted siege. He ordered his men on horseback to charge the tower. It was a foolish, desperate move. As they galloped across the open ground, Bo took careful aim. He shot not the men, but the horses. 2 of the animals went down, sending their riders sprawling. The charge broke, the remaining riders retreating out of rifle range. Jedediah was trapped. His men were divided, pinned down, and being picked apart by a seemingly invisible enemy. His rage turned to a cold, calculated fury. "Burn them out," he screamed. "Burn the whole damn mission to the ground." His men began to gather brush and dry timber, piling it against the base of the bell tower. In the tower, Bo and Eleanor saw what was happening. "They're going to try to smoke us out," Bo said, his voice grim. "We don't have much time." The final phase of the battle was about to begin. They were trapped in their adobe fortress, and the fire was coming. But Eleanor, looking down at the portfolio in her hands, knew that this was about more than just survival. They had to win. They had to get the secrets in this book to the world. "Bo," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "there is one more thing you should know. It is not just the deed that is in here. It is a ledger. My father's ledger. It details every bribe Jedediah paid, every man he had killed to build his empire. It names the politicians, the judges. It's enough to bring down not just him, but his entire network." Bo looked at her, and then at the portfolio, with a new understanding. This was not just a property dispute. This was a war against a vast, corrupt enterprise. And they were holding the evidence that could burn it all to the ground. "Then we are not getting out of here," Bo said, a new, hard resolve in his voice. "They are." The smell of smoke began to drift up the narrow stone staircase of the bell tower, a dry, acrid scent that carried with it a promise of a fiery death. Below, Jedediah's men worked with a frantic, spiteful energy, piling brush against the thick adobe walls. They could not win with bullets, so they would win with fire. Inside the tower, the revelation of what the portfolio truly contained had changed the very nature of their fight. This was no longer about escape. It was about ensuring that the ledger of the damned, the book that Eleanor clutched to her chest, survived, even if they did not. "If they burn the tower, the book burns with us," Eleanor said, her voice taut. "Then we can't let them burn the tower," Bo replied, his mind racing. He peered through one of the slits. The fire was not yet lit, but it would be soon. The men below were distracted, their attention focused on building the pyre. This was their only chance. "I'm going down," Bo announced, his voice a low, determined growl. "What?" Eleanor cried, grabbing his arm. "That's suicide. They'll kill you before you take 2 steps." "They're expecting me to stay up here," he said, his eyes hard. The last thing they expect is for the fox to come out of his hole. He looked at her, and his gaze softened for a fraction of a second. Your job is to stay here, to protect that book. If I don't make it, find a way. Get it to the nearest marshal. Do you understand? It was not a question. It was a last will and testament. Eleanor looked at him, at the grim resolve on his face, and she knew she could not argue. She simply nodded, her throat too tight for words. Give me covering fire, he said, his voice all business again. Don't shoot to kill. Just make them keep their heads down. He took a deep breath, drew his Colt, and disappeared down the narrow, dark staircase. Eleanor was alone. She took up the Winchester, its stock feeling heavy and unfamiliar in her hands. She rested the barrel on the edge of the window slit, her heart hammering. She could hear Beau's footsteps on the stone below. She saw the first of Jedediah's men approach the pyre with a lit torch. She took a deep breath, sighted on the ground in front of the man's feet, and fired. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, its roar deafening in the small space. The bullet kicked up a spray of dirt, and the man with the torch jumped back, startled. The man at the base of the tower looked up, confused, and began firing wildly at her window. She ducked back, the adobe wall absorbing the bullets. She had their attention. While the men were distracted, firing at the tower, Beau emerged from the small, barricaded doorway at the base. He moved like a wraith, a blur of motion, his Colt bucking in his hand. He was not fighting like a cornered man. He was attacking. He shot the man with the torch in the leg. He shot another man, who was turning to face him, in the shoulder. He moved with a terrifying, lethal grace, a whirlwind of violence. The outlaws were caught completely by surprise, caught between the sniper in the tower and the demon who had just appeared in their midst. Their discipline broke. They were no longer soldiers in a siege. They were just terrified men, trapped and exposed. From the perimeter, Jedediah and Riggs watched in disbelief as their plan fell apart. Kill him, Jedediah shrieked, his voice cracking with fury. Kill him. Riggs and the remaining men on horseback charged, their guns blazing. Beau, now facing an attack from a new direction, dove behind the crumbling wall of the chapel, the same place he had set his decoy. He had gone from the hunter to the hunted. Eleanor, from her perch, saw what was happening. She saw Beau, pinned down. She saw Riggs and the others closing in for the kill. And she knew she could not just stay here and provide covering fire. The book was important, but the man who was fighting for it was more important. She made a decision. She laid the Winchester down, took the precious portfolio, and tucked it securely inside her dress. Then she began her descent. She was not going to the fight. She was going around it. While the battle raged around the chapel, Eleanor slipped out of a small, forgotten sacristy door at the back of the mission. She kept to the shadows, using her knowledge of the terrain to circle around the entire complex and scene. Her target was the horses, which Jedediah had left lightly guarded at the far side of the mission. Inside the chapel ruins, Beau was fighting for his life. He was a master gunman, but he was outnumbered. He used the crumbling walls for cover, his shots precise and deadly. He took down another of Riggs's men, but he was trapped. It was only a matter of time. Riggs, a brutal and effective fighter, was closing in, moving from cover to cover. Beau knew that the final, bloody confrontation was seconds away. At that moment, a new sound entered the fray. The sound of a horse, galloping hard, away from the mission. Jedediah spun around. He saw a lone figure on a fast horse, riding hell for leather towards the open plains. It was Eleanor. The girl, he screamed. She has the papers. Get her. Don't let her escape. It was the ultimate dilemma. His personal vengeance against Beau, or the recovery of the evidence that could destroy him. Greed and self-preservation won out. Riggs. With me, he yelled. He and his remaining men abandoned their attack on Beau and spurred their horses in a frantic pursuit of Eleanor. In the chapel, Beau found himself suddenly, strangely, alone. The firing had stopped. He cautiously peered over the wall. He saw the posse, a cloud of dust in the distance, chasing a single rider. He understood instantly what she had done. She had created a diversion of her own. She had sacrificed her own safety to save him. She had drawn the wolves away from him and onto herself. A cold, terrible fury, unlike anything he had ever known, filled him. He scrambled from the ruins, found one of the outlaws' horses, and mounted up. He was no longer a defender. He was an avenger. He rode after them, a lone ghost of vengeance, determined to bring down the heavens on the men who were hunting the only person in the world he had left to care about. The chase was a desperate, thundering affair across the open plains. Eleanor pushed her horse to its limits, the wind tearing at her hair, the precious ledger a hard, reassuring weight against her body. She was not a natural rider like Bo, but she rode with the reckless abandon of someone with nothing to lose. Behind her, the shouts of Jedediah and his men grew closer, a baying pack of hounds closing in on their quarry. She had made a calculated gamble. She knew she couldn't outrun them forever on the open ground. But she wasn't riding aimlessly. She was riding towards a specific destination, a place of stark and brutal finality that she remembered from her childhood, the Cimarron Gorge. It was a massive, jagged scar in the earth, a 1,000-foot drop to the river below. The trail leading to it narrowed to a treacherous, single-file path along the cliff edge. It was a death trap. But it was also, she hoped, her only chance. As she rode, her mind was a whirlwind of terror and a strange, exhilarating clarity. The years of passive suffering had been burned away. She was no longer a victim being hunted. She was a warrior, leading her enemy into a trap of her own choosing. Behind her, Bo was gaining. He was a better rider, on a fresher horse, but he was still a distant third in this desperate race. He could see Eleanor, a small, defiant figure ahead, and he could see the posse, closing the gap between them. He urged his horse on, his face a grim mask of determination, his heart a cold knot of fear. Eleanor reached the gorge first. She didn't slow down. She galloped onto the narrow, crumbling cliff-edge path, her horse's hooves sending pebbles skittering into the abyss. After 50 yards, the path widened slightly onto a small, rocky promontory that jutted out over the canyon. Here, she stopped. She turned her horse to face the trail, her back to the 1,000-foot drop. She had nowhere left to run. She was making her stand. Jedediah and his men thundered onto the path, their triumphant shouts echoing in the canyon. They saw her trapped, and reined in their horses, a line of menacing silhouettes against the sky. "It's over, little sister," Jedediah called out, his voice dripping with sadistic pleasure. He dismounted, walking towards her, his pistol in his hand. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble, but the game ends now. Give me the book." Eleanor sat tall on her horse. Her face was pale, but her eyes held no fear. "You will never have it," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Your reign is over, Jedediah." "My reign is just beginning," he sneered. "After I deal with you, and your cowboy friend, no one will ever dare to question me again." He raised his pistol. "Now, for the last time. The book. If you want it," Eleanor said, holding the leather portfolio up, "you'll have to come and get it." She held it out over the edge of the cliff, over the dizzying drop to the river below. Jedediah stopped dead, his face a mask of disbelief, which quickly turned to fury. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "Try me," she replied, her voice as cold as the canyon wind. "Everything that proves who you are, what you've done. It all ends right here if you take one more step." It was a stalemate, a battle of wills on the edge of the world. Jedediah wanted the ledger, but he wanted his sister, his property, more. He was frozen, his greed warring with his sadistic desire for control. It was at that moment that Bo arrived. He didn't charge in with guns blazing. He appeared at the head of the narrow trail, a silent, deadly figure, blocking their only escape route. He dismounted, his Winchester held at the ready. The posse was now trapped between a woman who held their future over a cliff, and a ghost who held their lives in his hands. "Ramsey," Bo's voice was a low growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. "You and your men, drop your guns. Right away, and you might live to see another sunrise." Jedediah, caught between two impossible choices, finally snapped. His face contorted in a mask of pure, murderous rage. "No one tells me what to do," he screamed. He made his decision. If he couldn't have it all, he would destroy it all. He fired his pistol, not at Bo, but at Eleanor. The world seemed to move in slow motion. Eleanor, reacting with a speed she didn't know she possessed, spurred her horse to the side. The bullet that was meant for her heart tore through the horse's neck instead. The animal screamed, a terrible, high-pitched sound, and reared in agony, its eyes wide with terror. It lost its footing on the crumbling edge of the cliff. Eleanor was thrown from the saddle as the horse, in its death throes, plunged over the edge and into the abyss. She landed hard on the rocky promontory, the portfolio flying from her grasp. She scrambled for it, her fingers just managing to close her on it as it teetered on the very brink. The shot broke the spell. Riggs and the other men, seeing their leader open fire, drew their own guns. The narrow cliff path exploded into a deafening, chaotic gunfight. Bo opened fire, his Winchester barking, its shots precise and deadly. He took down the man closest to him. The other outlaws, trapped on the narrow path, were easy targets. While the gunfight raged, Jedediah, ignoring everything else, charged towards Eleanor, his eyes wild with a singular, obsessive focus. He had to get the book. He had to get her. Eleanor, still on the ground, saw him coming. She had no weapon. She was helpless. But she was not alone. Bo saw Jedediah's charge. He knew he couldn't get a clear shot without risking hitting Eleanor. He dropped his rifle and drew his Colt, breaking from his cover and running straight at the remaining outlaws, a desperate, suicidal charge to get to her. The race to the precipice had become a brutal, final confrontation. On one side, a man driven by a mad obsession. On the other, a man driven by a desperate, protective love. And in the middle, a woman, clinging to the evidence that had cost them all so much, on the very edge of the world. The narrow cliff path became a hell of ricocheting bullets and panicked, screaming horses. Bo's charge was the act of a desperate man, but it was also the act of a supremely skilled one. He moved with a focused, lethal grace, his Colt speaking in a steady, deadly rhythm. He wasn't just shooting, he was creating a path. He shot Riggs in the chest, the foreman falling from his saddle with a look of shocked surprise. He shot another man who was taking aim at him, the bullet spinning the man around and sending him toppling over the cliff's edge, his scream swallowed by the vast emptiness. The remaining two outlaws, seeing their leader dead and the ghost of vengeance charging at them, lost their nerve. They turned their horses and fled, galloping back the way they came, wanting no more part of this suicidal fight. Now, only one man was left, Jedediah. He reached Eleanor, who was still scrambling on the ground, the ledger clutched in her hand. He kicked it from her grasp, sending it skittering across the rock, and loomed over her, his face a mask of triumphant, insane rage. "It's over," he snarled, raising his pistol for the final, killing shot. He never had a chance to fire. Bo, his path now clear, tackled him from the side, a human cannonball of pure, protective fury. The two men crashed to the ground, just feet from the cliff's edge. The pistol flew from Jedediah's hand. The fight became a primal, brutal struggle. It was not a gunfight. It was a battle of fists and teeth and pure, unadulterated hatred. They rolled on the ground, grappling, each man trying to gain the upper hand. Jedediah was bigger, heavier, his body fueled by a lifetime of arrogance and cruelty. He landed a solid blow to Bo's head, and Bo's vision swam with stars. Jedediah pressed his advantage, his hands closing round Bo's throat, his thumbs digging in. "I'll kill you," he gasped, spittle flying from his lips. "I'll kill you, and then I'll take what's mine." Bo's air was cut off. Black spots danced in his vision. He was losing. Eleanor watched, horrified. She was not a warrior. She was not a killer. But she was no longer a victim. She scrambled to her feet and looked around frantically for a weapon. She saw Jedediah's fallen pistol, lying on the rock a few feet away. She grabbed it. It felt heavy and alien in her hand. She had never fired a gun like this. She ran to the two struggling men and pressed the muzzle of the gun against Jedediah's head. "Let him go," she said, her voice a raw, ragged sound she didn't recognize as her own. Jedediah's crazed eyes flickered up at her. He saw the gun, and he saw the look in her eyes, and he laughed, a gurgling, mad sound. "You don't have it in you," he sneered. "You're weak, just like your father." That was his final mistake. The mention of her father, the man whose memory he had desecrated, the man whose legacy he had stolen, broke the last of her restraint. She didn't shoot him. She did something that was, in its own way, more final. She cocked the hammer. The loud, metallic click was the last sound Jedediah Wade would ever hear clearly. He flinched. His grip on Bo's throat loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Bo needed. He gasped for air and, With a final, explosive burst of strength, he reversed their positions, rolling on top of Jedediah. He did not choke him. He did not punch him. He simply pinned him, his face inches from the man who had caused so much pain. "It's over, Jedediah," Bo said, his voice a strained whisper. He looked up at Eleanor, who stood over them, the gun still shaking in her hand. He saw the terrible, agonizing choice in her eyes. "No, Eleanor," he said. Don't become him." Slowly, she lowered the gun. The rage in her eyes receded, replaced by a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. Bo got off Jedediah. He was a broken man, his spirit shattered, his power gone. He just lay there on the rock, weeping in pathetic, impotent rage. Bo walked to the edge of the cliff and retrieved the precious portfolio. He brought it to Eleanor and placed it in her hands. "This is yours," he said. "You've earned it." They stood there for a long moment, two survivors on the edge of the world, the wind whipping around them. The reckoning was over. They did not kill Jedediah. They left him there, on the cliff's edge, a man with no army, no power, and no future. They took his horse and began the long, slow ride back towards the distant promise of civilization. They knew that the contents of the ledger would be a more fitting, and more complete, end to his reign than any bullet could ever be. They had faced abyss, both literally and figuratively, and they had walked away, not unscathed, but together. The journey out of the Badlands was a slow, quiet pilgrimage. They rode side by side, the silence between them no longer one of fear or uncertainty, but of a deep, shared understanding. They were two people who had been to hell and back, and the experience had bonded them in a way that words never could. They arrived in the territorial capital of Santa Fe a week later, dusty, exhausted, and almost unrecognizable as the people they had been. They were not a drifting cowboy and a broken prisoner. They were two determined individuals with a purpose. They went directly to the U.S. Marshal's office. The Marshal, a weary, battle-hardened man named Elias Vance, listened to their incredible story with a skeptical eye. He had heard his share of wild tales. But then Eleanor opened the portfolio. She spread the documents on his desk. The original land grant, the ledgers, with their meticulous, damning entries of bribery, extortion, and murder, all in her father's hand, with later annotations by Jedediah. As Marshal Vance read, his skepticism turned to a grim, steely-eyed belief. He had heard rumors about the Wade Empire for years, but he had never had anything concrete, anything that would stick. This was it. This was the key that could unlock the entire corrupt enterprise. He breathed, looking up at them. "This is enough to burn the whole rotten structure to the ground." The wheels of justice, which had been absent for so long, began to turn with a surprising speed. With the evidence provided by the ledger, Marshal Vance secured federal warrants. He assembled a posse of his toughest deputies and rode for the Cimarron territory. Bo and Eleanor did not go with them. Their war was over. They stayed in Santa Fe, giving their official testimonies. For Eleanor, standing in a federal courtroom and speaking her truth, clearly and without fear, was the final, definitive act of her liberation. She was no longer a victim whispering in the dark. She was a witness, speaking in the clear light of day. The news that came back from the Cimarron was of a swift and total collapse. Jedediah Wade, found wandering and half-mad in the wilderness, was arrested without a fight. The few remaining men on his ranch surrendered without a shot being fired. The empire, built on fear, crumbled into dust the moment a true, higher authority appeared. The local sheriff was arrested. The corrupt judges and politicians named in the ledger were indicted. It was a cleansing. The Wade Ranch, by legal right, was now Eleanor's. A month later, she and Bo stood on the porch of the main house, the same porch where Jedediah had ruled his kingdom. The place was quiet now. They were free of the oppressive weight of fear. "What will you do now?" Bo asked her. She looked out at the vast, beautiful valley that was now hers. She had every right to hate this place, to sell it, and never look back. But it was also her home, the only one she had ever known. "I think," she said, a small, determined smile on her face, "I'll make it a place my father would have been proud of. A place where people are treated with fairness, not fear." She was no longer just a survivor. She was a founder, the architect of a new beginning. She turned to Bo. "And you, Bo Carrigan, will you keep running from stillness?" He looked at her, at the woman who had, in saving herself, also saved him. He had come to the Wade Ranch looking for a few weeks' pay. He had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. A reason to stop. A home. An anchor. "No, ma'am," he said, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "I think my running days are over. I think I've finally found a piece of land worth putting down roots on." He reached out and took her hand. It was not the act of a savior, but of a partner. They stood together, two scarred but unbroken souls, looking out at their future. The battle was won, the ghosts were laid to rest, and in the heart of the Wild West, in a valley that had once been a private hell, they were about to build a small piece of heaven. The sun was setting, but for them, it was the dawn of justice.